Eskom's financial woes are not helping the country's economy. The power utility was granted a 59 billion rand bailout over the next 2 fiscal years. During his State of the Nation address, President Cyril Ramaphosa promised to split Eskom into 3. The indebted power utility is yet to appoint a permanent CEO. Well, Sipho Pjana, the president of Business Unity South Africa, is my guest this evening, following, of course, comments that he made in an email that his office sent out to members of his organization. Good evening, sir. Thank you very much.
Good evening, to you and your viewers.
For your time. Well, I have quite an interesting letter you sent to your members criticizing the government for its handling of the crisis at Eskom. But first of all, let's start with the appointment. From what you've been able to gather, what was the reason? I mean, the Eskom board and whoever else, should have played a part there. Why they took so long to even begin a process of appointing a CEO?
Well, the Eskom crisis is the biggest overhang on the South African economy. The performance of the economy in the first quarter was largely to do with the power cuts that we saw at the beginning of the year, among other things. There's a great deal of concern about what comes across as a lack of urgency in dealing with the issue. The board that was appointed last year came up with a restructuring framework that it couldn't carry through because some of the difficult decisions that came with it, there wasn't political will to see through. A technical committee that the president appointed early this year came back with a similar set of proposals that were not acted on. So clearly, all those things signal a lack of urgency to deal with the crisis. And then, of course, the suggestion that there must be an appointment of a chief restructuring officer raised expectations that you would have somebody who has had an experience of going through a major restructuring of as complex an enterprise that Eskom is elsewhere, or who has a deep understanding of that space. So, whereas I have immense respect, by the way, for Freeman Nomvalo. He's a great professional. I've known him for many, many years. I've got great regard for him. I do think, though, that given the crisis there, it may be one of those cases, if you throw him in a place like that, and yet another excellent black professional may be sacrificed, as we did with the former CEO there. So it is quite important that we select and identify people who are going to go in that space very carefully. But also, he's not available on a full-time basis. If you're going to do this, you need somebody who's going to drop everything and go and do that. The suggestion is that it's going to be a chief restructuring office. That compounds the problem. You have a board, you have a technical team, you have an executive that is placed there, and then you have a chief restructuring office. Who is in charge of this place? Who's responsible for restructuring and making sure that...
Well, for some reason, it seems to be something that the government is married to, but it's not only going to do it at Eskom, is going to do it at all these troubled parastatals. So they seem to have gotten this idea from somewhere, and they seem to be married to it, and they seem to believe that it is actually going to do what needs to be done.
Well, the government needs to communicate a clear plan of what it is that needs to be done at Eskom to fix it, and how long it's going to take, what kind of skill sets are required to do that, so that people can assess who gets appointed to lead the charge in respect of that. You need, as you take these decisions, to build public confidence that, you know what, there's urgency, and get all of us to sit up and feel that this thing is being taken good care of. To the extent that that is not so, people are taking all kinds of measures to deal with what they think is a worst-case scenario that is unfolding in front of their eyes. It's absolutely critical that we send the right message in terms of the appointments that we make in respect of, particularly Eskom.
But, I mean, have you not had these conversations with the government? I mean, we've seen you being part of some of the road shows. You were in Davos. We've seen you alongside the president here in conversations about the economy and about the priorities that we need to focus on. Is it because you feel now that you're not being listened to?
In December last year, I can tell you we had a meeting of leading business figures from across the economy, and a 3-person delegation went and met with government and said, Eskom is a big crisis, and we are concerned that the lights are going to go off at the beginning of the year. From everything that we hear, there needs to be a move with regard to taking some of the difficult decisions. We know that we are having an election coming, and it's going to be difficult to take those decisions. But if we are to save the economy, we have to take those decisions. Secondly, having had the midterm budget statement that was made by the Minister of Finance, it all speaks to a prescription of an austerity program where you rein in your costs, or somebody else is going to do it for you. And that the February budget speech by the Minister of Finance would have to speak to that, and it didn't. So clearly that suggests that there is a lack of political will to move on these things. You can be sure that those discussions were as candid and frank as I've been in my communication to the business community. And that letter, by the way, is to say to the business community, the mandate you gave us to communicate to government, we indeed communicated it. So
what was the response of the government at the time?
You know, clearly the president made a commitment that certain announcements are going to be made, and the announcements that were made at the beginning of the year spoke to a commitment to make sure that we keep the lights on, making sure that there's a bailout of Eskom, appointment of the technical team, pronouncement that there would be a splitting of Eskom, etc., etc., etc. All of those things are interesting, but they fall short of an overhang at Eskom. What drags Eskom largely is the fact that its cost profile is unbearable. So the burden of debt in Eskom is unmanageable. There's been a loss of technical skills. The contracts that they've entered into with some of the service providers to Eskom are way in excess of what is reasonable for service providers there. So you need somebody who's going to move in there and actually deal with all of those things. I don't need to tell them what needs to be done. From what we've seen of a set of proposals that have been put forward, they make a great deal of sense, but they're not acted on.
But then, I mean, if you say you've met with the government, you've had these frank discussions, and you got the impression that you were not only listened to but heard. And so many months down the line, nothing has happened. Do you not think that the government will have done the things it promised or undertook to do if it knew what to do, or at least how to do it? Alternatively, if it had the courage to actually do the things?
Well, you know, the frustration from business stems not so much from the fact that we don't have access and communication with government. Government is very receptive. We meet with cabinet ministers, we meet with the president, and we have a sense that we're heard. Nobody says that anything of what we say is absolute nonsense. We have an engagement. We get a sense that also that government knows what needs to be done. Between that and actions and execution on very straightforward things, for instance, the tourism industry, we say, is a key driver of growth that are easy entry jobs for unskilled and large numbers of unemployed. Sort out the visa problem. These are conversations that we're having at the beginning of the year. The visa problem is still not resolved. We need to access high-end skills, which we don't have readily available in the country, so that in the interim, whilst we train people, we can have whoever we bring in around to drive some of the key projects. Visa issues and permitting, giving work permits is still a problem. Spectrum is something that we're talking about at the beginning of the year. There have been promises that within the next month or two, spectrum would be sorted. It's still not sorted.
Okay, your list is getting longer. The list is getting longer.
Right,
but you see, I mean, there are a lot of voices that, while supportive of Cyril Ramaphosa and his administration, have actually been critical of his apparent tardiness and indecisiveness. Now, with some even saying that maybe he should now forget about the Tumamina song and belt the other Masekela song, Kauleza. Just your thoughts. Do you think that there is something that is perhaps holding the president and his administration back?
Well, one can't help but feel that the side shows in the political arena around the internal differences in the ANC. He's being dragged by the public protector around the issues around the campaign, which in my view are outside of the purview and competency of the public protector. And having to engage with all of those kinds of things that in terms of where the country is at and its priorities being the economy.
But I mean, should he not be focusing on national priorities instead of the sideshows?
How do you, when you actually have an overwhelming mandate? By the way, largest number of people who voted for ANC this time were voting for, were passing a vote of confidence in the leadership of Cyril Ramaphosa. And guess what? Post that election, he's dragged by an ANC that is involved in the middle of major squabbles that seem to be quite parochial in terms of, in the context of the challenges, huge challenges that are facing the country. By the way, remember that the challenges of the economic challenges that we face today are in the context of a very difficult international economic environment. So we need to be up there seeking to position South Africa to mitigate a great deal of what is coming at us as a result of those international headwinds. We can't do that if the leader who is supposed to be driving that is forced to address sideshows as far as the country is concerned.
Is he forced, really? Is he forced? Well, I mean, can he do absolutely nothing about the situation he finds himself in?
Our political system is a party system. He can't ignore the dynamics that are happening in the party. Because without the party, he cannot be the president.
Well, with you saying that, then like you bring me to another point. You know, I think it was last month you made a very compelling argument in an opinion piece you wrote about around funding, but you're also, of course, dealing with the whole public protector issue. I mean, I'm keen to know what your thoughts are on the so-called Ramaphosa leaks or emails, because I mean, the email suggests that the president was personally involved in fundraising, or at least knew a lot more than he was prepared to admit previously. And taking into account that the fact that a big argument for transparency is that if politicians receive large donations from individuals or entities, they will inevitably be expected to pay back.
Well, my view is that private sector, as part of support of a democracy, should donate to political parties. They should support people who stand for certain things that they believe in. It's part of free expression. It happens in most democracies. And in my view, to the extent that you do that in a transparent way, people can see that company X or so-and-so in business has funded that political party, and there you see that there's a contracts that they are getting in government, and you can make the connection. So transparency enables society to scrutinize those transactions.
Which is the argument people who are pro-reforms are actually making.
Absolutely.
But in this instance, there's two seemingly minor, but to me very important issues. One is the fact that, or at least from what has come out of the emails, the president actually knew a little bit more than he was prepared to admit. And that's taking into account the fact that there are no rules at the moment.
My assertion is this. These emails, true, real, or otherwise, are sideshow. Complete waste of time. The reality of the matter is that they say that the president got money from so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. I'm not sure what is so illegal about that. The reality of the matter is that the president is not prohibited by any law in canvassing for a political position in his party and in the country from seeking political funding, financial support from anybody that is so wishes, for as long as that donation is not money that is been obtained through illegal means. If there is a suggestion that he obtained money by illegal means, then the appropriate institutions in this country must investigate that. So the idea that there is criminality by virtue of seeking to access funding from private entities, my quibble is that I wish that all of that is done in a transparent way so that we can track who funds and what are they looking to get. I don't think that in principle there's anything wrong in private sector or individuals in business or anywhere else for that matter donating to political parties. I think it's part of good citizenship. It happens in most democracies. There's no reason why it shouldn't happen here. But this whole idea that we are all focused on, there's this big secret that suggests that the president got money from certain private sector players. Where did his opponents on the other side get their money from? Why are they not part of this?
You admitted that all these side shows are making it difficult, if not impossible, for him to do what he needs to do. So perhaps one way then of dealing with the side shows is to make sure that you don't fall into the trap that your detractors have set for you.
Exactly, but my point is this, that he is under no obligation as things stand today to have disclosed. So he was perfectly capable and legitimately able to say to his donors, if you donate money to me, I have no obligation to divulge. So if you're not comfortable in making a donation to me because you're going to be, your credentials are going to be out there in the public arena, the system allows you to do it. There's no illegality. What are we talking about? So we're dragging the president in the middle of a major debate that is a sideshow when in fact we should be letting him focus on the key issues that are facing the country today, which is an economy that is in trouble.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Is, of course, the president of Business Unity South Africa.